Paid Leave Oregon is finally here. So why do I say finally? I like to kind of put this into context because we've been hearing a lot about Paid Leave Oregon for years at this point. It was signed on July 1st, 2019. This picture here, also taken July 1st, 2019. It was my first day back from maternity leave with my son there. This next picture was just a few weeks ago. That little baby is now that big kid in the back, and I've had a whole other child since then. So this idea of Paid Leave Oregon has been floating out there in the ether for a long time. It's something that employers have been anticipating for a while, maybe feeling some anxiety. So we're here to kind of cover all of that. So here's kind of the laundry list of things that we are going to go over, and the timeline, the benefits, eligibility. There's a lot to cover. It feels overwhelming, but remember, one of the nice things about Paid Leave Oregon is it's primarily administered by the state, not by employers. There are still, of course, things that employers need to do to comply with it, but a lot of this stuff, especially a lot of the technical math stuff that we'll go over, is handled by the state, which should be great, comforting news. So, timeline. You'll notice the first deadline here has already passed. Back last week, November 30th, equivalent plan applications were due. That won't be the only deadline for equivalent plans, and we'll chat about that later, which is why I left it up there. But that was the deadline to avoid payroll contributions that start on January 1st. So January 1st is when payroll contributions will begin for employees and employers. And the benefits will begin September 3rd. So the question we always kind of get with paid leave is, who's paying this and how much? You know, when we think about paid leave, we think about an employer paying an employee to be out on leave. That's kind of the traditional American model of paid leave. But this is not that. Paid leave is coming to employees via the state. It is like an insurance program. So employers and employees are paying into it using payroll contributions, and then employees are taking out of it from that fund through Paid Leave Oregon. So unless you're doing an equivalent plan, which we'll talk about, and in an equivalent plan, you would be the one paying the employees. So other than that, it is the state that is providing those funds to employees. So how much are they earning? These are one of the math items that I'm going to say we are grateful that we don't have to do and that the state is taking care of. So the amount that Paid Leave Oregon will pay employees depends on their wages. So if their wage is equal to or lower than 65% of the state's average weekly wage, then they're going to get 100% of their wages from Paid Leave Oregon. If their wage is more than 65% of the average weekly wage, they're going to get that 65% plus 50% of the wage greater than that 65%. So let's say 65% is here, their wage is here, they're going to get the middle. Again, I'm happy that I will not be doing that math. I imagine many of you feel the same way. The next kind of question is, who is going to be eligible for paid leave? And this is broad. Basically, it's employees who have made at least $1,000 the year before applying. This does not mean they have made $1,000 with you. It's that they've made $1,000 in wages that's being paid into this state insurance program. This is designed to be very broad. For those of you who have employees in Washington and are kind of accustomed to Washington paid family medical leave, that's also very broad. You know, so that's sort of the trend that we're seeing, is these very broad laws are meant to encompass many employees. There will, of course, be some people who aren't eligible, maybe people who haven't been in the workforce and maybe their job with you is their first job or their first job in over a year. But your default assumption and my default assumption is that all of your employees are going to be eligible because it is written so broadly. There is also an option for self-employed individuals to be eligible, but they have to opt into that. So let's talk a little bit about what are the paid leave benefits. So this is going to be up to 12 weeks of paid leave a year, or 14 for certain pregnancy-related conditions. This is, again, it's paid by Paid Leave Oregon, and it's a percentage of the wage up to 100%, with employer healthcare coverage maintained. Leave can be taken by week or by day. An employee's job is protected if they've been employed by you for longer than 90 days. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The other thing is that employees must give 30 days notice. But the caveat there is that if they don't give you 30 days notice, they still get to take the leave. So if they don't give you the 30 days notice, the penalty for that is between them and Paid Leave Oregon. It ends up being a percentage of their first week's worth of benefits. But again, that's not really something that's in our control as employers, but it's something between them and Paid Leave Oregon. So a reminder, those benefits begin September 3rd, 2023. So the payroll contributions. Contribution rates will be set each year. For 2023, this inaugural year for paid leave, it is 1% of gross wages, and that is split between the employer and the employee. So the employers have 40% of that 1%, and employees have 60% of that 1%. Small employers do not need to contribute the employer portion, but all employees must contribute, unless your employees are covered by an equivalent plan, which we'll talk about later. But if you do not have an equivalent plan, all of your employees will be contributing starting January 1st. And we'll touch on small employers later and what that means and whether there are advantages to contributing, even though you don't have to. But the default rule is that small employers do not need to make that employer contribution. So job protection. If an employee has been employed by you for over 90 days, they have job protection built into Paid Leave Oregon, meaning that when an employee returns from leave, they're entitled to return to the position that they held before leaving if that position still exists. Now, if the position no longer exists, we see slightly different rules for large employers versus small employers. If the position does not exist and you are a large employer, meaning you have over 25 employees, that employee is entitled to a position equal to the previous position with equal pay and benefits. If you're a small employer, they still have to have the same benefits and pay, but the employee can be restored to a different position so long as it has similar duties. So in either scenario, you're restoring people to a job with the same benefits and pay. They're not getting any demotion when they come back. But if you're a small employer and it is necessary for your business, you can put them in a different position with similar duties. And the thing to flag here is that a failure to provide job protections is an unlawful employment practice. And that should always be a red flag for everyone as we're going through things, because that will be the basis to any potential lawsuit against an employer under Paid Leave Oregon. So let's talk a little bit about equivalent plans. If you already offer paid leave to your employees, you can apply for that to be considered an equivalent plan. If you're approved by Paid Leave Oregon for your equivalent plan, then you don't need to make payroll contributions. Like we talked about before, that deadline has already passed. It was November 30th, unless you filed a declaration of intent, which I know we have some people who have done. We can put a pin in that and talk to you all individually, because it's sort of a niche process only for this initial year. But if you miss that deadline and you do provide paid leave, or you want to provide paid leave, they will be considering equivalent plan applications on a rolling quarterly basis. So you have not missed your opportunity, but you will need to start making payroll contributions as of January 1st. So equivalent plans must offer the same or more benefits than that of Paid Leave Oregon. So those benefits are what we talked about earlier: the amount of pay, the 12 or 14 weeks of leave, the health insurance benefits, job protection. Those equivalent plans must be approved by Paid Leave Oregon and go through their approval process in order to exempt you and your employees from making those payroll contributions. So as I mentioned before, we have a couple of things that are a little bit different for our small employers. Now, small employers means employers with less than 25 employees. That inevitably raises questions of how do we count those employees, particularly for those of you who might be right near that 25 employee line. And that's something that Paid Leave Oregon themselves has been trying to figure out. They initially announced one rule. Then after soliciting feedback from Oregon Business and Industry, they changed that rule just a few weeks ago. So to put it kind of simply, air quotes on simply, the employee count is the number of employees on payroll for the pay period that includes the 12th of the month. And it's the sum of the employees in Oregon as well as the employees out of state. So then we take that number of employees on the pay period that includes the 12th of the month, and we average it out over a 12-month period. And that gives you the number of employees that you have for purposes of Paid Leave Oregon. It doesn't include replacement workers for people who are out on leave. Super clear. Thankfully, the administrative rules actually have a ton of really useful examples, which is one of the great things about Paid Leave Oregon. You probably hear me pitch this a few times. They have an extensive website and extensive guidance. One of the nice things about it taking, nearly 4 years for this law to come into effect is they have had plenty of time to put out educational videos, brochures, notice posters, all of this stuff. So their website is a plethora of information. One of my kind of favorite examples, given the season that it is an employer like a Christmas tree farm. So as a Christmas tree farm, you may have employees in November and December, you may have 45 employees during those months. But because of the way that they are going to be calculating the number of employees that you have, it's going to be averaged over that 12-month period. So maybe from January through October, you only have 10 employees per month. That's going to average out so that you're still considered a small employer for Paid Leave Oregon. And, as kind of summarizing that, the small employers, the things that are going to be different is you are not required to make those payroll contributions, and your obligations for job protection are slightly different. One thing to note, it was on this last slide that I didn't say, is if you do choose to make those contributions, you're eligible for assistance grants to help cover the costs, such as temporary workers during an employee's leave. So small employers not required to make those contributions. You can, and if you do, then you're eligible to apply for these assistance grants. So what do all employers have to do? We're talking small, we're talking large, we're talking everybody. So you must report employee wages for those working in Oregon and employee counts for Oregon and out-of-state employees. Because remember, that number that we're averaging from the payroll period that includes the 12th of the month includes out-of-state and Oregon employees. You must withhold and submit payroll contributions. Even if you are a small employer who is not submitting your own payroll contributions, your employees still need to be submitting employee contributions, which of course means you need to be submitting your employees' payroll contributions. You must inform your employees about Paid Leave Oregon, allow your employees to take that leave. You must maintain existing health benefits for employees on leave, and not discriminate or retaliate against employees for taking this protected leave. And then, of course, the job protection benefits that we talked about before, restoring employees to their position after taking paid leave if they have been an employee with you for over 90 days. On informing employees, I mentioned this previously, but Paid Leave Oregon, one of the many resources that they have is a model notice poster that you all can access via the Paid Leave Oregon website. Actually, I have a link on a later slide that you can print out to be able to distribute to your employees or post in the place where you normally post your model notice posters. So these charts are going to look a little overwhelming. Remember, you're getting all of these materials. These are some charts that I got from Oregon Employment Department that kind of talk about all the other laws that we have in conjunction with Paid Leave Oregon. Paid Leave Oregon is new, but the need for family leave is not new, right? Employees have been taking family leave in various forms for forever. So these are just kind of going over how all of these laws interact. I will note kind of at the outset, you won't see workers' compensation on these charts because workers' compensation is a different process, a different beast, right? So your time on Paid Leave Oregon is separate from any time on workers' comp. Those are not going to run concurrently. They're not going to cover the same things. So looking at this chart here, this one's looking at eligibility requirements. We're looking at Paid Leave Oregon, OFLA, FMLA, and Oregon sick leave. One of the biggest differences for Paid Leave Oregon is there is no work time requirement for your employees to be eligible. You could have an employee that starts on Monday and needs to go on family leave on Tuesday, and they're going to be entitled to take that leave. They won't be eligible for those job protection requirements that don't kick in until after 90 days. But so long as they had $1,000 in wages from any employer in the previous year, they're going to be eligible to take that leave no matter how long they have been your employee. We also have talked about how it really is going to cover all employers. You know, even if you are a small employer who's not making the payroll contributions, your employees are still going to be eligible. So just because you're a small employer, employees of small employers still going to be eligible for Paid Leave Oregon. This chart is looking at the qualifying purposes for these different types of leave. You'll see there's overlap for basically every type of leave that there could be. And any of these leaves like OFLA and FMLA, they're going to run concurrently with Paid Leave Oregon. So if you have an employee that's out on Paid Leave Oregon for this top reason, right? Family leave, the birth or adoption of a child, they are going to be using their 12 weeks of Paid Leave Oregon concurrently with their 12 weeks of OFLA, for example. Something to note here is Paid Leave Oregon doesn't cover everything. For example, if you have a sick child, you are not going to be eligible for Paid Leave Oregon unless it is a serious medical condition. But, you know, if you have a kid, like I was home yesterday with a kid with the flu, right? That's going to be eligible under Oregon sick leave or maybe OFLA, but it's not going to be Paid Leave Oregon. And then finally here we have the leave duration and the benefits payments. So again, we're looking at this 12 weeks in a 1-year period or 14 as a maximum for certain pregnancy related conditions. This is less than the OFLA and FMLA, but it's also paid, right? Which is unique among these family law leaves. And then the benefit amount is going to be that variable math equation that we are thankful we are not doing and that Paid Leave Oregon is taking care of. The most important thing for us to remember is that Paid Leave Oregon is not going to exist in a vacuum, right? All of these other laws are going to continue to apply. And here we're really just looking at the family leave laws, right? So we're still always going to have the ADA, we're always going to have workers' comp, we're going to have all these other different types of laws that interact in these complicated ways where hopefully you're going to pick up the phone and call us so that we can work through it together, especially as we're going through this first year of trying to figure out when Paid Leave Oregon kicks in and how to best support these employees as they're going through this. So one of the traditionally unique problems for Portland employers has been kind of dealing with employees that live in 2 different states. Now, with remote work, as Carly and Olivia discussed, that's kind of a problem for everyone. It's no longer unique to Portland, but we do still have a unique problem of perhaps having multiple work locations for the same employee that are both in Portland and in particularly in Southwest Washington. So given the long lead up time for this law, we actually have some rare joint guidance from the state agencies that administer Paid Leave Oregon and the Washington Paid Family Medical Leave. They issued a joint letter, which I put a link in here for if anyone wants to read it. It, like some of the other guidance, provides some pretty useful examples. Both states are going to first consider the physical location where the work is performed, which is a super easy question if all the work is performed physically in one state. So if I'm always working at my office in Oregon, great. That's, Paid Leave Oregon is going to be the one that applies. Or if I'm always working at a Vancouver office, the Washington Paid Family Medical Leave is going to be the one that applies. If I go back and forth between the two offices, the question is going to become, where's the base of operations, or where does direction and control come from? So let's say I work the same amount in the Portland office as I do in a Vancouver office, but our headquarters is in Portland, my boss is in Portland, they're the ones giving me control and direction. Then it's going to be Paid Leave Oregon that applies, not Washington Paid Family Medical Leave. So if you work in both states, but direction and control does not come from any of the states in which you work, then the question is going to be where the employee resides. So let's say I work part of the time in the Portland office, I work part of the time in a Vancouver office, but the headquarters for my organization is actually in Tennessee. And so all of my direction and control is coming from Tennessee. Then the question is going to be, what state do I as an employee reside in? I reside in Oregon. Oregon Family Leave or Oregon Paid Leave Oregon is going to apply. And again, there are lots of useful examples in that joint letter to help us as we all jointly try to navigate through remote employees and where they are and what paid family leave systems might apply, particularly because it's not just Washington and Oregon that have paid family leave, right? There are some other states too. So as we have employees from more diverse states, we're going to continue coming across this question. So it's finally happening, right? After years, kind of. Benefits themselves don't start until September. But now is the time to be figuring all of this stuff out that we need to do. Contributions begin January 1st. That is less than a month away. Given the holidays, I imagine it's like 3 solid working days away. So definitely encourage everyone to get in contact with their payroll provider, make sure everything is set up to be making those payroll contributions starting January 1st. It's a great time to update your employee handbook to make sure that employees know about Paid Leave Oregon and the changes that are coming. Educate your employees, educate HR, post that model notice poster. And if you want to pursue an equivalent plan, remember that it is not too late. That initial deadline has passed, but they're going to continue considering them on a rolling basis. So either as we're all figuring it out and you decide you want to do an equivalent plan, you can submit it now. It may be that after benefits kick in September, employers realize that that's not going to be the best fit for their company, then you can explore an equivalent plan at that time. And of course, contact us if you have any questions. We are deep in the Paid Leave Oregon regulations, as you might imagine. I think Kristen last week sent us some light 90-page reading on it. So we are all here and happy to help everyone through this as we also go through it ourselves.